Hello, everybody. How are you? I hope everybody is staying safe worldwide in this coronavirus challenge. So stay home. Let's get it all. Let's get this thing behind us so we can get back to the fun and sun prior to this current crisis. But we'll get through it. And as a distraction, I know so many of you are clamoring for this video, but we're going to get right into our Tucson series. We had a little bit of an intro yesterday, but right now we're going to get right into it. We're going to go all the way back in this video. We're going to look at the origin of Tucson. How did it come about? Why is it there? Why is it named Tucson? All this fun stuff, guys. Oh, let's do it. All right, so now listen, I've said this many times about native tribes in most of America that were around before the Europeans came rolling over the horizon. And in many cases, they go back 300, 400 years. Listen to this. In the Tucson area, there were probably Paleo Indians that were rolling around the Tucson area 12,000 years ago. Okay? The only person that was around then was Larry King. Can you imagine that far back? I mean, they found a village that from the area, a village. They found it. Archaeological expeditions found a village. Okay, that was a exact duplicate of a Dave and Buster's from 2100 BC. Guys, oh my God. I mean, they were farming in the area like 1200 years BC. All right. So they were growing medical marijuana. They were one of the very first ones, and you had to have a note from a doctor. It was amazing. So now the things that they found when they do these archaeological expeditions are one of the most common things is pottery, shards or segments or pieces of pottery from back in those days. Primarily used for cooking. So they would cook different kinds of tacos, tostadas. They would cook burritos. You could get a cruncherito. You could get a crunch wrap. You could get a Mexican pizza that is very similar to the one served by a very famous restaurant right now. You could get what were known in those days is a little tortola, which is a little sandwich, and all kinds of stuff that they made in these early tribes, guys. And this is not just a few. I mean, they found so many pots used for cooking that they knew there was a restaurant row that ran through Tucson in those days. And different pots are aligned with different types of food that was offered. So you could get Chinese food. You could get Mexican food, of course. You could get a lot of Indian food of the native tribes. You could get German food, Australian food, Italian food. You could get pasta. You could get spaghetti. You could get sushi. Okay, seafood, all kinds of food, all through the Tucson area hundreds of years ago. And now, a lot of times they call this the early home ceramic period. And it's when pots were moving from a decorative item that was used in the home to grow plants. A lot of the pots were used to put a plant in. And if it was a guy responsible for the plant, then you could be sure that it was going to die because they've always forgot to water it. They always had to be told by their wives, water the plants. When I'm out on the plains picking berries, when I come home, you better have watered the plant. And then the pots moved from plant holders to cooking. Now, this was not intentional, but these same dumb guys that wouldn't water the plants, one guy realized he forgot to water the plants. He didn't want to get in trouble with his wife, so what he did was he dumped the plant out and tried to stage an accident. Well, what ended up happening is the pot ended up on the stove, and in the cabinet above, the commotion caused a concertina of cans. Now you're going to listen to a lot of videos this year. You're going to watch a lot of videos. You're going to listen to a lot of podcasts, is my guess. But never have you heard the phrase concertina of cans. A concertina of cans fell from the cabinet above the cooking area onto the pot that is now on the stove. And as he fell, he flicked the stove on, therefore using pots for the first time for cooking. Which ushered in a new era of Bed, Bath, and Pottery stores throughout the area. Bed, Bath, and Pottery. So, of course, this was all going on, and they were enjoying life. They didn't have any need for anything from the Spanish, from the British, from the French. They were loving life. They didn't need anybody to roll over the horizon and change the world for them, okay? They were just living the natural life with nature. But here comes the Spanish, all right? The Spanish missionary, Esteban Francisco Betanquino, he arrived around the late 1600s. And what did they do? These Spanish missionaries, what did they love to do besides playing blackjack till all the wee hours of the morning? They established missions. They would establish a mission at the drop of a hat. In fact, sometimes they dropped a hat and they looked up and there's a mission they built. I mean, it was unbelievable. So that was about 7 miles from where Tucson is today. And the reason that it was 7 miles from what's known as Tucson today is that was part of the laws of the New World that the Spanish laid down, is that a lot of the missions, or at least the first mission, if they were going to have several in an area, they wanted the first one 7 miles from the downtown, because they didn't really think of the cities expanding to the way they have today. And they thought 7 miles is far enough from the sin and debauchery of the city, and that's why they established it that far away, which was fine. But if you're out of the mission and you had to go into town to get some eggs and milk, well, now you got a 7 mile walk. Let's say you walk 3 miles an hour. Okay, you're talking about a 2 hour and what? 3 miles an hour. 2 hours and 20-minute walk just to get some milk and eggs, and then you got to walk back. Oh my God! Oh my God! Yeah, and God help you if half the eggs are broken by the time you get back, because you're walking. You might take a spill. All right, so now where are we? All right, so the late 1600s, they get the mission going, and of course this is one of the original missions were some of the better ones, guys. Yeah, this mission had a golf course, tennis courts, a steam. A lot of the friars would just say, "I'm gonna go do a steam," and they'd sit in the steam room with those robes on, those big heavy wool robes, and a few of them passed out, and a couple of them didn't make it. But that was the price of being out there on the prairie, the desert prairie. All right, so then things started to shape up to what we know them today. They had a guy named Hugo Bugo, and he was known as the father of Tucson. So this guy, he wanted to get it going, so he built a fort. Now, what the Spanish missionaries were good at was building missions, but some of these first settlers in the area were military types that were good at building forts. So sometimes they would combine efforts. Sometimes they'd put a mission inside a fort, but a lot of people don't know this. Sometimes they'd put the fort inside a mission. You'd go into what they called the main outdoor patio area of the mission. They had this kind of the adobe style where there's an outdoor patio in the middle with the building wrapped around. And what's in the middle of that is a fort. They weren't the biggest forts. You're talking about probably 300 by 400 feet. But guys, if you wanted to feel protected inside a mission, now you're inside a house of God, inside a fort that is with a garrison's protected by 30 to 40 cavalry officers. I mean, unbelievable. So then the fort, which they called the Presidio San Agustin de BLT, bacon, lettuce, and tomato of Tucson. That was commissioned on or kicked off in 1775. So now we're into the 1700s. And in fact, that original fort, if you go there today to the Pima County Courthouse, that's where that fort was originally, right near there. And in fact, the fort was built, and then they built the courthouse next to the fort. The courthouse is still there. The courthouse was built back then. Now, in those days, they used it as a storeroom. They used to store all of the games, like footballs, basketballs, all the gaming equipment. Hockey sticks, roller skates, roller blades, shoulder pads, all the pads that they needed to play football, baseball bats, floor hockey sticks. A lot of games were, they stored all the equipment in what is now the Pima County Courthouse. So now we're into the Spanish era, right? We've moved from the native Indian tribe area to the Spanish comes rolling over the horizon, dropping missionaries every 40 feet because they love those missions. And what happened? Well, of course, there's the famous Battle of Tucson, and this was between a fort and a mission. So what happened was the mission said that they were going to delay Mass by an hour to accommodate the broadcast of the Super Bowl. And the fort said, listen, can you make it 3 hours? Because we're pre-gaming. So just move it down. We're pre-gaming. In fact, I think at one point they said, can you move Mass to the day before? So rather than a Sunday, this is where the first Saturday Masses started to come about, because a lot of the soldiers in those forts, they were trying to convince the missions in the area, because of the football game on Sunday, can you have Mass on Saturday? Well, a lot of missionaries, they didn't like that. They said, listen, we are the guys that are closer to God, and God isn't going to like you asking us to move the Mass just because you want to watch a bunch of guys get their heads bashed in on Sunday chasing around a leather ball. So that's where the war between the first missions and the first forts took place, and they call that the original Battle of Tucson. Now, it wasn't you're fighting priests, so they would do these. They would do these, I don't know what you call that, where the priests sing. They do hymns. And they would get in the bell tower and sing hymns up there. And the echoes would go out over the plains, over the fort, over the desert, into the fort. And these guys would have to listen to the same hymn for hours on end. And so these monks, they were trained in mental pain. They were trained in mental intimidation. They were playing a tough game, whereas these soldiers, all they knew was, physical battle. But the monks, they knew what they were doing. They were doing a long-term game to drive them crazy, and eventually they all worked it out. They sat down and they played Dungeons and Dragons and had fun. So, all right, so now, blah, 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 Battle of Tucson, we covered that. The town came to be called Tucson, which is from an old Indian word. Let's go back. I'll have to refer to that one. The Odom tribe used a word for the area called Tucson, and that meant a retirement community slightly less expensive than Phoenix, but more fully featured. Okay, and that's what that meant. And so that's that word Tucson actually eventually became Tucson, or Tucson. Okay, now blah blah blah. Okay, so then Tucson became part of what was known as the state of Sonora. Okay, because Mexico, they gained independence from Spain in 1821, and then that became the Mexican state called Sonora, and then Tucson was part of that state. Then you've got the Mexican-American War in the mid-1840s. All right, and what happened? What happened to Tucson? Well, they got captured. Here comes the Americans, I guess you could say. Here come the Americans. Well, they came over the border of what was the state of Sonora, and they captured Tucson. Now, how did they do that? Well, guys, I mean, when you get a community like Tucson, where a lot of the residents are snowbirds from Canada, all you got to do is say that you are going to broadcast the Stanley Cup for free at the local sports bar. And you get all those Canadians in one room, and then you just surround the place and you say, we are capturing the town of Tucson. That's what happened. But then the Mexicans, believe it or not, they got it back. They got it back. And how did they do that? Well, as easy as it was to capture all those snowbirds inside that sports bar, all the Mexicans had to do was surround this shopping complex where the sports bar was located. There's a lot of new military tactics that were used during this time period in American military history. So then eventually, of course, we all know what happened. That's right. That's right. Eventually, the Mexican-American War ended, and the United States took over those southwestern states, including what was Sonora, soon to become Arizona. And then what happened after that? What happened right after that? The California Gold Rush. And so you had half of Tucson took off and headed for California. All right. And of course, the U.S. acquired Arizona with a treaty with Mexico, blah, blah, blah. We all know that. But they didn't take control of the area till like 1856. And what happened between the time of the gold rush in 1856 was you had a lot of people waiting for their relatives to send profits from their gold prospecting ventures in San Francisco and, of course, in the hills outside of San Francisco in California. Well, what happened was half of those people, they just never were seen again. And now we don't know if they died up there in the hills penniless or if they hit the big time and decided to go into San Francisco, spent all their money on buying a house on Nob Hill, and then rolling down the hill drunk every night. And eventually, you do that too many times, you're going to roll down that hill and into the bay, and you won't be able to fight your way to the surface because you've had too many cocktails. So we don't know, but the problem is then by 1856, the American military came rolling in to take complete control of the town. And then they said, we are going to make the C and Tucson silent because a lot of people were still calling it by the old word. Like I said, Tucson, they pronounced that C, Tuk. Well, eventually the Americans said, man, that's way too much work to go Tuk. And they just called it Tucson. It's a lazy Americanism right there. And then by the let's say the late 1850s, it became a station on the San Antonio to San Diego dance line. So what you had in those days was a bunch of dancers that would dance their way from San Antonio to San Diego delivering the mail. So you've heard of the Pony Express. This was the Dance Express. They would dance along that line, dropping mail along the way. Now, sometimes if they had a particularly difficult maneuver, sometimes the mail came flipping out of their pockets and it landed on the road, on the trail. And so some people did not get their delivery from the Columbia Record House. So they signed up to get 50 records for 10 cents, and a lot of times their records didn't show, which led to a government investigation in Washington, and that's why they went from the dance line style mail delivery to Pony Express, because they figured, hey, just put them on a horse, no more dancing. So then, all of this time, you had difficulties with the holdout natives in the area. For example, the Apache would attack the station because even though it was now American, now it was a state, now it was part of the United States, still you had native tribes that didn't agree to any of this and were not happy, of course, that these people had rolled into their land and now were establishing themselves to take it over, essentially. So the Apache would attack the station on and off through the 1860s. And of course, as time went by, the native populations would diminish as the European populations increased as they came rolling over the horizon from Lima, Ohio, and points east. So, believe it or not, though, Tucson became the capital of the area. Tucson was the original capital of Arizona. So they didn't really call it Arizona; they called it the Arizona Territory. And they said, "Well, what are we going to make what are we going to make it as the capital?" So just like when we talked about Omaha. Well, across the river you have Council Bluffs, Iowa. And in the old days, in the early 1800s, as we learned, the Council Bluffs was the big city. Omaha was just this outpost across the river where, criminals and cowboys lived. Sometimes the same people. Whereas in the Arizona territory, Phoenix was just the apple in Tucson's eye. Tucson was the big city. Tucson was where everything was happening. That's where the film industry was. If you wanted to make a movie, you had to do it in Tucson. Phoenix wasn't even big enough to start a trailer park. Okay? And now we know today that it's mostly trailer parks. But Tucson was the original capital of what they called the Arizona territory. And then next door was the New Mexico territory. And New Mexico territory and the Arizona territory, they used to swap the Super Bowl. And it wasn't the regular Super Bowl, it was the Southwest Super Bowl. It was an original version of the Super Bowl that was unique to those territories, and they'd swap it back and forth every year. And the only real difference between the Super Bowls was that they didn't use a ball in the Southwest Super Bowl. They used a bag of taco chips. And sometimes, a lot of those football players are big boys. They'd open that bag and start eating it, and then they get tackled, and then they'd end up losing the game. But in those days, sometimes you just got to eat. Now, as we get into the 1870s, what happened was the stagecoach started to become a major method of transportation between towns, between areas, between communities. And what happens when you have people rolling through Arizona and New Mexico from the east with their life savings? Well, yeah, you're going to get robbed. And there was stagecoach robberies through the area. Now, there were different types of gangs in those days because they had the singing gangs. They'd roll up beside the stagecoach singing, "Hey-oh, hey-lo, hey, hey-lo, hey-lo, hey, we're gonna rob your stagecoach today, hey-lo, hey, hey," like that. And it was a bit of this mental game that they learned from the monks where you do this singing and it terrifies the people on the stagecoach to the point where they just stop and give up their stuff because they don't know what you're going to do to them, right? And you don't even have to fire a shot. Well, that's what would happen. That was the main way that people got robbed back in those days. And then, of course, if somebody decided to play the hero, you always get one young buck tries to play the hero. Well, then they'd hold him down and they would make one of the gang members sing a kung fu fighting over and over until that guy gave up his wallet, and then they could get away with a complete robbery without making a shot. Making a shot, shooting a shot. Shoot your shot, boy, shoot your shot. Well, guys, that is the 1870s. So then, as we get into the 1880s, you start seeing more gunfights in the area. And this is where Tucson really got its reputation of gunfights at high noon, gunfight. I mean, they would gunfight for a plate of scrambled eggs. Like if you walked into a diner in those days and you were eating, let's say you're at the counter eating scrambled eggs, and a big rootin' tootin' sharpshooter comes in and he's like, man, are those scrambled eggs? And you're like, yeah, sit down and get yourself some. He goes, no, I want your scrambled eggs. And then he would start shooting at, not necessarily at you, he would shoot at the plate of eggs. And he would make the eggs flip in the air, and then the eggs would fly into his mouth without him taking out a fork. I mean, it was unbelievable. The guy could eat a whole thing of sausage and eggs just by peppering the plate with a series of bullets. I mean, guys, that's what was going on in those days. And you say, well, they just put him in jail and they had to sleep off the anger, sleep off the aggression. Maybe it's because there wasn't enough women out in the West in those days. You're thinking, no, they didn't have any problem being in jail. They were able to bring their guns into their hands from the desk where the sheriff would hang the guns by using mental projection. They could make the guns float in midair, and then once they had the guns inside the jail cell, they were able to pepper the cell door with bullets and get out, and then they were off to the races again. It was the Wild West, guys. Criminals ruled Tucson, is what I'm saying. Criminals ruled Tucson in those Wild West days. Now, you had some boring settlers coming into town. They were trying to be farmers or landowners and start a college or do that boring stuff. But the sharpshooters are like, no, we want to open up sharpshooter land. They wanted to make it a thing that everybody in the family could enjoy, where you learn to be a sharpshooter at sharpshooter land. They had big plans, guys. They were going to have a roller coaster where you would be able to have targets along the coaster route, and they would teach people coming to sharpshooter land how to pick off these targets while the roller coaster is in motion. They had one target at the top of the steepest hill at the beginning of the ride. You'd go to the top, tick, 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 tick. And just before you go over the top, where everybody starts screaming and they put their hands in the air, they had a target up there. And then they would let you shoot it, boom, boom, boom. And so everybody's shooting at the target. And then shortly afterwards, the thing would descend to the earth at 300 miles an hour with people waving their hands in the air and going, wah, just like they do today. Unfortunately, they weren't able to get the financing together, and sharpshooter land, while they did have that roller coaster built as a model to show potential investors, ultimately they were not able to open the thing to the public and make millions of dollars and start a Sunday night TV show called The World of Sharpshooterland. So now the new century rolls around, 1900. Now you had like 20,000 people living in Tucson at that time, and still 15,000 of them were sharpshooters, were outlaws, okay? I mean, they had this phrase, meet me at high noon, boy, and we're going to draw and settle this. Well, that was taking place every 20 minutes. They had to schedule the high noon duels. If you went to, hey, meet me outside, boy, at high noon, well, you get there and there's a guy scheduling the draws. In other words, if you wanted to draw on somebody at high noon to settle a duel, right? By turning back to back and walking off 10 paces and turning around and firing, or the original style where you just saunter out there and you stand there and stare at each other for 5 minutes waiting for somebody to make a move. Well, you couldn't just roll out to the middle of the main street in Tucson and do your thing. You had to schedule it. There were so many duels going on. You had to sign up on a sheet, and then they'd call your name. And God forbid if you didn't respond to your name, like let's say you were in the outhouse attending to nature, you had to reschedule it for the next day. I mean, guys, it was an outlaw city, and that's today. Until today, it still has that same flavor. When you go to Tucson today, you can see all of the shell casings from all of those gunfights back in the day. They just didn't have time to clean them up, and they still haven't. There's like hundreds of thousands of shell casings in downtown Tucson on Main Street. Just go there today and look down, you'll see them. All right, so now you've got the 1900s rolling around, and here's what happened. This is interesting because the United States government realized that the clean, dry air was very good for the resuscitation of veterans who had experienced gassing in World War I. And so that really was the original source of why people go to Tucson today to get why all those snowbirds from Canada come down to get that fresh, clean air. And that's why you have a lot of retirees there today. Okay, but it started with the soldiers from World War I, and the reason that they were gassed so bad is because of the beans. I mean, they served so many beans. Now, look, it was World War. They didn't have all the supplies, but the beans were plentiful. And those guys eating those beans, producing gaseous clouds that were knocking out their own forces. They called it friendly bean fire. Guys were getting knocked out by friendly fire from their beans. Guys were letting it rip, and that smell was knocking out half our forces. And so eventually they shipped them over there to Tucson, and they get that fresh, clean air, and they fixed them right up. So, but now the city is growing and growing. And so now into the 1920s and the 1940s, by 1940, you had like 40,000 people. And by 2006, you had like 500,000. Holy banana. And 475,000 of those are Canadians. And 350 of them are from Toronto. I mean, you could go down Yonge Street today in Toronto, and you will meet, I would say 1 in 5 Toronto residents will tell you they're moving to Tucson eventually. And if you press them on it, they'll say, well, listen, I already start my letters with the letter T in Toronto. And it's just easier to go ahead and move to Tucson. That way I don't have to learn a whole new letter to start my letters. Okay, when I put my address on my snail mail, I don't want to have to write a whole new letter every time. Like if I moved to Phoenix, I'd have to start it with a P. Well, that's more ink than if you just use a T. So that's why a lot of Toronto Canadians moved to Tucson and started hockey teams everywhere. I mean, everywhere you go in Tucson, you see a hockey team. Every community has a hockey rink. It doesn't matter that it's 120 degrees. They've got the science to keep the ice nice and solid. And you see those guys out there playing hockey in the middle of the sun beaming down. You got to put on sunblock to play hockey in Tucson. But they don't. Those Canadians would play hockey anywhere. Those Canadians would play. If you moved Canadians to Mars, the first thing they'd build is a hockey rink, and they'd start playing hockey. They love that hockey. So now today you have this booming metropolis. Okay, this one of the fastest growing cities in the United States, guys. You've got an airport. You've got a courthouse. You've got schools, colleges. You've got a state school there where the kids know how to put away 400 or 500 cans of beer in a weekend. One person. You've got all of the accoutrements of a major city right there in Tucson. And yet you have this small town feel of a community that cares about its citizens. A community that is arm in arm, shoulder to shoulder, making it a better place to live every day. Well, guys, that is the beginning of Tucson, how it all began, where the name came from, all of those things I promised at the beginning of this video. Now, keep in mind, I made up all of this off the top of my head. So you should not use this as a reference for your senior's thesis or your master's thesis or any kind of commercial venture where you need to write marketing copy, including the history of Tucson, because you will get fired from that job. You will get kicked out of that school. You will be disavowed by your professor because I made all this up off the top of my head. And so far, my musings are not allowed as a proper reference in a doctorate or master's thesis. So with that caveat, guys, I hope you enjoyed that. Come on back. There's so much more we're going to talk about Tucson. I hope this was a good distraction from the coronavirus problem, the constant hassles we have. But if you're isolated at home, maybe this gave you a little bit of respite from watching reruns of Match Game on the game show channel 800 times. I mean, I love Gene Rayburn, but how many times can you hear him say the same joke because you're watching that show like 50 times a day? Come on. All right, that's all I got. Come on back, guys. We got so much more on Tucson all this week. See you, bye.